Hi, Michele. Thank you so much.
No worries. We hear you loud and clear, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Well, to echo what Michele said, Mary and myself certainly want to thank you all for setting aside time to join us on today's webinar. We do recognize it's a very busy time of year for everyone, so really glad to have you here with us, and hope that you find this beneficial to the work that you do. So quick highlight, our goal really for today's webinar is to take you through a sample Haven impact report to break down for you what the data in it is telling us, and also to provide strategies for how you can use this data to guide your ongoing prevention and compliance efforts at your institution. So really, regardless of whether you're looking at this data from a prevention or a compliance perspective, the information provided in this report can really be used to support you in all of those efforts across the board. So hopefully that becomes very clear by the end of today's presentation. So before we go ahead and get started and dive into the data, I just want to take a really quick minute to introduce myself as well as my colleague Mary, who is co-leading today's webinar with me. And so to start, some of you on this call may or may not know me from our work together. I saw a couple of the folks I work with on the line today, so great to see you here. But my name is Molly Burke, and I've been on our customer success team here at EVERFI for just over 3 years. Prior to coming to EVERFI, I actually worked in the higher ed space myself at an institution in the Boston area for close to 5 years. And really my primary goal in my work as a CSM here at EVERFI is to support schools in helping them to achieve successful implementations, and also ensuring that they're taking advantage of all of the resources available to them beyond the courses, such as the data which we're reviewing today. And a lot of the work that I do now focuses on supporting our strategic system partnerships that really involve a very large number of schools within each relationship. So I'll turn it over to Mary really quick just to say a few words about herself as well.
Thank you, Molly. As Molly said, my name is Mary, and I am a customer success manager here at EVERFI as well. I currently support a diverse group of partners. However, many of my partners include national organizations, those fraternities and sororities. So many of your students may also be taking EVERFI courses through that experience that they have. I also work with a lot of our HBCU partners and then our mid-sized institutions as well. Prior to my work at EVERFI, I also worked in higher education in all different types of institutions. So I've worked at a large research institution, a small women's only private institution, as well as some state schools as well. So I'm excited to be presenting some of the data with you all and working with you in partnership to kind of understand your data a little bit better in the courses.
Awesome. So quick question, as Michele mentioned, we do have a couple of poll questions throughout the presentation today, just to really learn a little bit more about the folks on the call and how familiar you are with the data and the impact reports. So our first poll question we wanted to pose to you, and we do hope that all of you will participate if you're able to, just to get a good grasp of everyone on the phone today. So Michele, if you want to go ahead and put that first poll question up, our first one for you is really, to please tell us about your experience with EVERFI impact reports. So on screen, you'll see here that the options are, I've never heard about it until now, I've heard about them before, but never really looked at them, I've been sent one and looked over it, or my institution holds an annual meeting. So just in 1 second, you should be able to go ahead and, all right, great, I'm seeing a lot of responses already. Well, it looks like we have about 77% of you have already voted, so that's great. And it actually looks like the overwhelming majority of you, it looks like close to 75% of you have been sent one and have looked over it. About 10% of you, your institution holds an annual meeting. So it's great to see that a lot of you are really familiar with the impact reports and are aware of them, but it sounds like maybe you don't kind of look at it annually and really use it each year in your prevention efforts. So hopefully this presentation will help to dig in a little bit more on how you can use them moving forward.
And there's an overview of the responses as well. All right, so we're just going to close that poll and we'll go back into our presentation here. Fantastic.
All right, thank you so much to everyone who participated in that. So to give a quick intro of the report itself, the Haven Impact Report can be a really helpful tool to share with your colleagues and senior leadership at your institution to demonstrate the great work that you all are doing and the importance of it. And it really helps to demonstrate the impact to determine where your time, your energy, and really your funding, hopefully, should be spent moving forward to help, build institutional buy-in, which is incredibly critical in an effective prevention strategy. So for those of you who are not familiar with EVERFI and our trainings on this call, or even if you have colleagues at your institution who are not as familiar with us, this report can also help to provide context for them into what our course content covers and the approach that we take with our students. So as a reminder, we do deliver these impact reports every year to all of our partner institutions for every training that you're deploying, and they're typically delivered in the February to March timeframe. Do want to give you all a quick reminder, though, that in addition to the impact reports, there is also real-time data available to you in your school's administrative account within our EVERFI Analytics platform. So that really allows you to access the course survey data year-round, potentially before students even step foot on campus, so that you don't have to wait until February or March when these specific reports are delivered to you. So as a reminder, we are going through a sample Haven Impact Report today, exactly as it is delivered to you each year. So your report, when you go to look at it, will be laid out in this exact format and order. So really the only difference, of course, is that when you go to look at your own report, it's going to have your school's specific data in it. But this slide is showing you basically the format of the impact report itself, and that's going to be how we're leading the remainder of today's call. So about EVERFI, just in case there are folks on the line today who are not as familiar with EVERFI as an organization and our mission, we wanted to give you a quick high-level overview here of that before we dive into the data. So ultimately, our goal in the work that we do around these critical wellness issues is to support institutions in making lasting, large-scale change with your students and your faculty and staff. And for some brief historical perspective, our experience and focus actually used to be exclusively with first-year students, because as all of you are well aware of, that really is a very high-risk group, especially in the first few weeks of the fall semester. However, recognizing that federal mandates, along with best practice, requires us to educate all students, faculty, and staff on an ongoing basis, we've more recently expanded our offerings to provide a more comprehensive and really campus-wide solution. So this includes courses specific to, certain populations of students, as well as ongoing refresher trainings for returning students or employees. And really, as an organization, we recognize there's no silver bullet solution to these issues. We don't see our online courses as the sole answer, but instead, we really hope that our trainings can provide you all with baseline foundational knowledge for your students and faculty staff at scale, so that you can then build off of that and what the individuals learn in the trainings with your ongoing and in-person efforts. So we definitely recommend that a combination of the online trainings alongside your in-person sort of more personal programming is a really great approach. So beyond the work we do itself, this slide is a really great representation of the scope of our work really in the reach that we have kind of across the country. So in the last 2 years, EVERFI has actually seen tremendous growth. We now work with over 1,700 institutions across the country with a variety of different types of institutions. So, 2-year, 4-year, public, private, large, small. We really span, a pretty diverse group of institutions. And we certainly hope that this will provide you all with an incredible network to be able to connect with peers in the field, to strategize and share ideas with, whether it be on our webinars like today or at, in-person events we might have. But we also hope that you'll benefit from this network, being that it's going to allow you all to have a really expansive national data set available to you for benchmarking purposes, to really be able to get a sense of where your institution falls in the larger national context. So in terms of the benefits of partnering with EVERFI, these are just kind of the top 4 areas that we feel we really excel in as an organization. We hope that you all will benefit from in our work together. In terms of our expertise, we try really hard and have built a team that really deeply understands the higher ed space and these critical topics. So our higher ed division is comprised of public health professionals, many individuals who used to work on a number of different higher ed campuses themselves. I know Mary and myself mentioned that earlier. Some of us actually, some folks on our team have actually implemented the EVERFI trainings to students at their higher ed institutions before coming to EVERFI. So ultimately, we know that you all wear a lot of hats, and we want to serve sort of as an extension of your team and the work that you do to help support your efforts. We also have a group of 10 in-house lawyers on staff to ensure that we maintain compliance with legislation and really stay up to date with ever-changing state-specific requirements that really vary so greatly across various locations. Beyond that, when it comes to efficacy, this is something that we value really deeply and focus all of our energy around, particularly when it comes to our course content. So we partner with experts and researchers on these issues to help us build our courses. So for example, with Haven specifically, we actually worked with members of the VAWA Negotiated Rulemaking Committee who helped us build Haven. And, this included folks like Jill Dunlap, Holly Ryder-Milkovich, who's now actually a part of the EVERFI team, to really help us align the course content with compliance requirements and prevention best practice. And a really quick note about the efficacy piece, we're super excited to share that actually in spring 2018, an article will be published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence about the efficacy of Haven. So really excited to share that all with you. So just wanted to touch upon a few of those so you have a little bit more understanding of the work that we do.
As Molly mentioned, the impact report can really be helpful when engaging with other stakeholders on your campus because the presentation provides an overview of EVERFI, which portion of that is what Molly just went over. We also go through the course itself as well as some best practices. And we really think a critical element to understanding the data that you're going to be presenting is to set the stage for those individuals who are not familiar with EVERFI or specifically Haven. So the next slides are really going to speak specifically to understanding the course design, structure, and content. While many subject areas that EVERFI courses address through prevention, such as sexual assault, do impact the individual, it is important to note that those effects on the individual can also impact the institution as a whole. We need to open our focus to consider the expansive impact these issues have. By doing so, we are able to better emphasize the needs to dedicate substantial resources and support for our students and community. So this slide, which is in your impact report, of course, is a great way to illustrate to senior leadership the impact of interpersonal violence and how it translates to the bottom line. This may allow you to open up those conversations and drive engagement and focus to your prevention efforts. One resource that I'll also note through the Campus Prevention Network, if you haven't seen it already, we released a blog post about our calculator. And this tool actually assesses your institution's potential revenue lost due to sexual assault related transfer students. So with this calculator, campus administrators can demonstrate the value of effectively preventing or responding to sexual assault as a part of student success and retention efforts. It essentially quantifies the idea that this slide is illustrating, and combining these two resources can really be a great driver for attention and focus to your efforts. If you're interested in the calculator, you can certainly send us a note if you'd like to, but we also, it can also be found on our Campus Prevention Network website. If you haven't been there, it is a fantastic resource. And so, we can certainly post that in the chat if you want as well. This next slide is an overview of the Haven course content. Haven, Understanding Sexual Assault, helps your campus to not only meet but exceed the Title IX and Clery Act requirements. Beyond compliance, we've also built a program that meets students as being a part of the healthy majority. We want to take a positive approach to these topics and engage students in being a part of that change. 1 out of every 3 college students has not actually engaged in sexual activities, and so we don't assume that they have in the course. The course definitely works to arm students with the skills they need to be a part of the solution and educate them on a variety of bystander intervention options. So you can see underneath content gives you some of the major content areas so that if people are asking what it's covering, you can, very quickly provide them, whether it be this slide or just those bullet points. As mentioned earlier, it is important to really understand the data that you're working with. This next slide is a visual representation of the course structure, as well as some important information regarding who on your campus has taken the course and what the following data is based off of. So as you can see in the first box, Haven starts part 1 with a survey and an assessment. The surveys are definitely measuring the attitudes, behaviors, and perceptions of your students. And if you are implementing this course pre-matriculation, this can assist you to better understand your new students' beliefs prior to them even stepping foot on your campus. The assessments are measuring the students' knowledge of the different content areas. Once they take the survey and the assessment, they'll actually move into the course content. And the course content is filled with different modules that address these issues with activities, resources, and your policies if you've included them. You do have the option, of course, to customize the course a little bit, and your policies will be placed into the learning modules where appropriate. They'll then end part 1 with a post-assessment. Once the learner completes part 1, they're placed in intersession, which is generally about 30 to 45 days, depending on what your institution has decided. And this time really allows students to immerse themselves on the campus and access the other resources and trainings you may be providing. Part 2 is a recap of some of the content and a reminder for additional resources. It concludes with Survey 2, which is a replica of Survey 1. Once you have both Survey 1 and Survey 2 data, you're able to measure the meaningful longitudinal data or change and better understand the campus environmental experiences. Again, by comparing these two pieces of data, we're essentially answering the question, how did their time on campus impact or change their attitudes and behaviors around sexual violence? Other important pieces of this slide that you may want to point out are the bottom box here that's greenish blue. This is going to tell you the number of students who have completed the course or who have taken the course. These numbers are a great way to demonstrate your good faith effort on the part of the institution to educate your incoming students, which can be used in your annual security report. And then finally, they can be used as a benchmark for your progress in each training year. These numbers are, if you look at this example here, if our target population was 4,000 students, then the data we're looking at in this report is really only about 50% of your population. So you want to keep that in mind, who you're trying to reach out to, who's actually started or completed the different portions of the course as you look through the data. And this data is a comprehensive look at anyone who has started, in progress, or have finished the course. We're going to launch one more poll here, try to break it up a little bit here, and we would love to get an idea of how our attendees are utilizing part 1 and part 2 of the course. So Michaela, if you want to launch that poll, and if you all wouldn't mind responding to it, we would love to kind of understand that mandate. So does your institution mandate the completion of part 2 of the Haven course? And the options are, yes, we mandate part 2, no, we only mandate part 1, no, we don't mandate the course at all, and I'm not sure what our mandate is, or if we do. And so as we're looking at this, when we talk about mandates, that can be a hard mandate or an implied mandate. The hard mandate would be a registration hold, a grade hold. It could be, if you're using it in your with your new students, maybe residence hall assignments aren't launched until they take the course, different things like that. We have some very creative partners. As we're looking at this, it looks like about 45% of our partners are on this call mandate part 2, 34% they only mandate part 1, and then 10% no, we don't mandate the course, or 10% I'm not sure. So this is a great, and we'll keep collecting for a few more seconds here. But this is a great opportunity for you all to utilize the course structure to better understand the data set that you're looking at. And so we certainly encourage the mandate of part 2. We know not everybody's able to do that. As you're going into the summer months, this is certainly a great time to start having that conversation, because you can plan for how you might do that. And certainly as we're looking at the data here, you can see where there may be some differences, and you'll have a more complete data set if you're able to mandate the entire course. All right, so we're going to close that poll, and we can project the responses here just so you all can see kind of just what I had gone through. And then, of course, if you have questions about best practices on mandating the course, please feel free to reach out to your customer success manager. We do have some resources that you can utilize and talk about how different institutions of the same size or location might also do that as well. Thank you for your participation in that. We're going to go back to our presentation here, and we'll move on to the next slide.
All right, thanks, Mary. So as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to measuring progress around your prevention efforts, it's really important to not only understand your own institution's data year over year, but it's equally as critical to understand how your institution compares more broadly when looking at the national context. So this can really provide even greater perspective around how your school is truly doing and what the focus should be for moving forward. So this is why in this report specifically, we do share some high-level national insights before diving into the school-specific data. And this is really information that will be helpful to keep in mind as you do look more closely at your campus's own data. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, what we're looking at is lifetime prevalence of both females and males having experienced some form of violence in their life, either before or after coming to campus. Whether it be relationship violence, stalking, or sexual assault. And really this data clearly speaks to the fact that this is a problem that does not affect females only, which we all know, but it's really helpful to see this data and make sure that that stays top of mind. This, of course, affects males as well, and we certainly cannot overlook that piece. So really just speaking to the importance of a population level approach with your prevention efforts and really making sure that your trainings are addressing all of your students across the board. Also, with students arriving on campus having already experiencing many forms of violence, or maybe experiencing them within the first few weeks of their academic experience, this data also really stresses how critical the timing of prevention efforts are, and really the need for early and effective education and training, ideally before students even step foot on campus. Especially when we know that sexual assault survivors are more likely to perform poorly academically, they're more likely to consider dropping out of school, and are also at a higher risk of being re-victimized. So if we look over to the right-hand side of the screen now, these insights really just illustrate the misperceptions that exist across all college campuses, which, as we all know, serve as barriers to bystander intervention. So what we can see here is that 80% of students nationally said they would refrain from engaging in sexual activity if the other person was incapacitated by alcohol or drugs. But they actually only thought that 52% of their peers would feel similarly or act in that same way. So this is really why social norming campaigns are imperative as a part of your approach. And we really need to make sure that students know they are a part of the healthy majority of students, that their peers feel similarly to how they do, and that they truly would be supported on campus for acting on their positive intentions and behaviors. So building off of that on this slide, we're really kind of explaining the idea of the healthy majority. So really this speaks to kind of a very important concept when it comes to effective prevention efforts. As you can see in the quote on the right-hand side of the slide, it is really tempting to want to focus prevention efforts on students who are very unhealthy and negative in their attitudes and behaviors when it comes to relationships. But ultimately, and it can feel like we're making great gains by directing our energies to those specific students. However, what we continue to see in our national data year after year is that actually the majority of students are coming to campus with very healthy attitudes and behaviors around relationships. It's a much, much smaller group of students who come to campus significantly more unhealthy in this area. So again, this is really why it's so critical to ensure we're addressing all students and really making a concerted effort to target that healthy majority of students, so that ultimately, if we can keep those students engaged and positive around these issues, they can really be our partners in change on campus, not only to influence their peers, but to help build safe and positive communities for everyone. And really with a population level approach, the impact of our work is going to be far more powerful than when we focus on a small subset of unhealthy students.
Great. So after the national data, the impact report is going to move into your institution-specific data, and that's going to start with your demographics. So this data is pulled from Survey 1, which is noted at the bottom of the slide. You'll notice anytime there's data on the slide, or there'll be a notation of where that's coming from. And this slide is a great resource for the institution so that you can better understand your population and create targeted programming, which is part of the Clery requirements that are outlined when you're looking at how you should be working with primary prevention education. Now that we have a handle on the demographics of our student population and those that have taken the course, we can look at the student experience in a little bit more depth. Here we are looking at the experiences before a student comes to campus and after they come to campus. As you can see on this slide as well, the definition of before and after are at the top. And if you have additional questions, you can always reach out to your customer success manager. We know that so many students are coming to campus already having these experiences. So understanding these numbers helps us adjust or evaluate what we're doing to address these topics. If you're looking, or if you see these numbers each year, whether it be in your impact report or if you're pulling these numbers from the raw data and looking at them in different groups, if you're seeing that these numbers are significantly increasing year over year, it may be a good opportunity to increase awareness around your counseling service in your residence halls, or perhaps increase educational opportunities for your staff or faculty so that they can support the students and that they're familiar with reporting resources and what steps they need to take as well. In this example specifically, we can see the percentage for both female and male students with each of these experiences. And while these are not just the experiences of the female students, we can see that the percentages for male students are a little bit lower. As Molly mentioned before in the national data set, kind of going along with the same trend here, but it's always good to share this with your students if you share data with them so that they can see that this is not just something that affects female students. The percentages are also a little bit lower after a student is coming to campus in most cases. I think you'll see this as a trend as well on most impact reports. This is most likely due to the fact that we're asking, in the before section, we're asking them about 18 years of their life or maybe more. And then afterwards, we're really asking them about the 4 to 6 weeks on campus. So the amount of time in each of those kind of groupings is significantly different. And so there is going to be a significant change in the number for both men and women or female and male students. The next slide is looking at the assessments. And so these are the knowledge gains for each of the content areas. So the quiz that we push to the students, each question is broken down into a different, or some of the questions are broken down into different content areas. And so this slide is giving you a few of those different data points. The main portion of this slide is showing you the aggregate exam score for the pre and post content. So before we even provide any educational modules, we want to know what the students understand. And then directly after the modules, we want to see what they've retained. That section of the slide is specific to your students. On the side, you can again see the national pre and post aggregate. So in this example, we can see that the students at the school have a high understanding of sexual consent. And this also aligns with the national aggregate as well. These are some additional knowledge gains, so just kind of a continuance of our previous slide. And although we don't see it with this institution, the only area that tends to not show a positive growth when we look at the knowledge gains is generally sexual assault prevalence. And it's hard to determine exactly why that is, but one reason that could really explain it is that students come into the course and onto campus and are overestimating the prevalence of sexual assault. And so once they've taken the course, this really level sets them to the actual prevalence. And the reason why we're suggesting that this may be the case is that we did have our data team look into this and look at the data. And what we saw was that students were selecting a higher percentage in the answer rates. So when we're looking at the options for what the students could select as an answer, the actual answer is about 20 to 25%, and 50% of the responses were actually overestimated in the pre-survey. And so again, we're just kind of level setting them with the course and the content, and so that's why we generally see you know, the post-course being a little bit less than the pre. So again, this just allows us to find areas that our students understand and perhaps use that knowledge to translate any areas of challenge. As you can see in this slide, there is a pretty significant jump in knowledge, so a knowledge gain for pre and post for strategies for supporting survivors. And certainly while we like to see that increase, it really is important to focus on the post number. We should be asking ourselves when we see these numbers and the post number specifically, is this where the student should be with their knowledge? Does it align with the national insights? And is this an area of opportunity? So while it's great to see the jump from 65 to 85% for strategies for supporting survivors, should that number be higher at 85? Should they be at a 95%? Is there an area for improvement there? And so that's really what you want to focus on when we're looking at these knowledge gains.
So in terms of bystander behaviors, what we're looking at on this slide is data from Survey 2 in the course. So as a reminder, Survey 2 is in part 2 of the course, after that intersession period when students have been on campus for at least a few weeks. And just to clarify, this is actually data only for students who indicated that they were in a situation that required bystander intervention. And ultimately, this is really great social norming data to share widely so that students can see very clearly that their peers are actively stepping up and playing a role on campus already within the first few weeks of school to help prevent violence. And what we've actually been seeing across the board with our partner institutions is that the percentages of students intervening when necessary in just the first few weeks of school is actually really high, such as this school that we're looking at here, which is very exciting and promising to see. And this is data that can really empower the healthy majority to stay healthy and to really act on their positive intentions when it might be necessary. As we're looking at the left-hand side of the slide here, in the very first data point, we see specifically for this school that 93% of students spoke up when they heard someone saying something they found offensive or demeaning. And I wanted to point this out because I think sometimes this concept, may often get overlooked, but really the use of language is a very key concept to discuss with students because of the significant impact it can have on campus culture. And a lot of times students don't even realize the positive role they're playing by stopping harmful language. They might not even realize it's considered intervening. So it can be very effective to emphasize the role of language and how important it is to be mindful of it amongst your students. So the data on the left-hand slide has given us insight into whether or not your students are stepping in during risky situations. So the next question we want to ask ourselves is, okay, so how are they taking action? What strategies are they using to intervene when necessary? And really knowing that every student is their own unique individual with their own personality and comfort levels, the Haven course very intentionally provides a variety of strategies for students around how they could potentially intervene in a situation if necessary. So for example, we make it very clear that, it doesn't always have to be very direct confrontation, addressing the person who appears to be taking advantage of another person. There are more indirect options as well to consider. So in our course, we do ask your students which strategies they would be most confident using if they had to intervene. And the data on the right-hand side shows you the top 3 behaviors that your students said they would be most confident engaging in. So for this particular school, we actually see that all of the preferred behaviors are really more of an indirect approach. For example, finding friends of those involved and asking them for help, or following up later to check in with the person who they were concerned about. So this type of data allows you to really play to the strengths of your students and understand what behaviors they're comfortable with, whether it be direct or indirect. So knowing that, you'll really want to emphasize those methods in your trainings moving forward, since it will resonate the most with them and be most likely an approach that they would be willing to take. Aside from that, though, I think it still is a good question to ask ourselves, especially for this particular school where most students are comfortable with indirect approaches. Are there other strategies that we still need to incorporate into our ongoing trainings to really build students' confidence in those areas and in maybe those more direct approaches where clearly they're currently lacking it? So what are ways that we can incorporate that and maybe build confidence and empower students to take a variety of different approaches? Or maybe, having the conversation with students to ask and understand why the direct approach isn't one that they necessarily would prefer. And looking at this all from a compliance lens, there are clear regulations that talk about the skill building components that are needed to teach bystander situations and intervention. So for example, just putting up a poster that says see something, say something is clearly not going to cut it. So that being said, Haven will effectively provide those critical skill building strategies to your students. In terms of social norms, so as you know, just before this, we were talking about bystander behaviors. On this slide, we're actually looking more at bystander intentions, really, and what students' intentions would be and how they say they would act in a particular situation. Again, this is data from Part 2, Survey 2 in the course after students have been on campus for at least a few weeks. And what we're looking at here is the percentage of students with healthy, positive responses to these various questions around sexual or relationship violence. So to provide some context into what we're looking at here, the responses to each question are posed to your students in a Likert scale format. So they do see them in a 1 to 7 scale, 1 being that they strongly disagree, 7 being that they strongly agree. So the percentages here that we're looking at are students who answered within that 5 to 7 range. So ultimately they positively agreed with each statement. So the orange bar is students' actual norm and their own personal perspective, whereas the blue bar is the perceived norm about their peers or others' perspectives around these situations. So speaking to what we saw earlier in the National Insights, this school-specific data is additional evidence around how big of a problem misperceptions are on campus. And we can see that there's a clear discrepancy between actual and perceived norms among students really across the board. And we do see this trend in pretty much every impact report we look at for our partner institutions. So for this particular school, the data point that clearly stands out the most is the one you see here, that's second from the bottom, would refrain from sexual activity if the other person was incapacitated. So the difference between the actual and perceived norm here is particularly concerning. So this would definitely be an area that this specific school would want to focus on in their ongoing efforts to try to understand kind of where the confusion's coming into play there, or the lack of confidence among students and how their peers would act to really address that at the forefront. And when we look at this slide in the report, it's also essential to keep in mind that intention has actually been shown to be the most important variable in predicting behavior change. So it's really, really great to see that students positively agree with a lot of these different scenarios and that they would in fact step in. But we also know that actual behavior change is driven really in part by an individual's perception of their social environment and the behaviors surrounding them. So the question we really have to ask ourselves here is, you know, what are we doing on campus to reinforce these safe and healthy norms and support these students in their positive intentions to encourage them to change their behavior and really act in positive ways. And again, similar with the slide right before this, this is a really wonderful slide to share the data with your students, do some social norming campaigns with, and really engage those healthy majority and give them a better understanding of, you know, that their peers really do feel similarly to how they do. A lot of the schools we work with often share this during orientation with students when they have first-year students really captivated and engaged in what's going on. So next up, we do have another poll question for you. Michele, if you don't mind getting that up on screen for us. But given that we just talked a lot about sort of bystander behaviors and intentions and how great that type of data really is to share with students, we were curious just to hear from folks on the call here today, if your institution shares data, whether it be EVERFI data or other data you have that you collect with your students on campus. So just a kind of a simple yes, no, or I'm not sure response there. All right, I think we have just about 60% of us have voted. Great, well this is really exciting to see. It looks like just about 50% of the folks on the line said that yes, they do share data that you all collect with your students, which is really, really great and exciting to see. So, you know, that's definitely something that we would recommend doing and continuing to do, and hope that the data from this impact report can only build off what you all are, clearly the majority of you have already started to do. And it looks like we have just about 70% of you voted. So Michaela, you can go ahead and close that if you don't mind, and we can show everyone the results. All right, great. So 50% of folks on the line already sharing the data, which is wonderful. Okay, so we can go ahead and move forward. Awesome. Thank you so much to everyone who participated in that poll question. So what we're looking at here is awareness and attitudes of our students on campus. So on this slide, as you can see, we're looking at students, with their attitudes and awareness for these various scenarios that we proposed to them for survey 1 responses versus survey 2. I do want to kind of, as a reminder to folks and just kind of an important note to keep in mind as we look at this specific data is that we really can't look at it the same way that, for example, we look at the quiz data. So the quiz data or knowledge gain data that we reviewed earlier, as Mary was speaking to, is really a true reflection of learning outcomes from the course directly. Whereas this data is really helping us to understand students' attitudes before versus after the course. And the course itself is not the only thing here that would be directly affecting students' attitudes. So another really critical piece of what would be influencing their awareness or really their perspectives around any one of these areas is the social environment they're in. So for example, they're most likely at home during the summertime when they respond to survey 1 versus being on campus for a few weeks in survey 2 when maybe they're being exposed to situations or influences from peers that they really have never experienced in the past and could potentially be altering their view or perspectives that they had on these issues before entering into the college environment. So again, just to give you some context with each statement we see here, students are able to respond on that 1 to 7 Likert scale. So the percentages on this slide represent the percentage of students who strongly agreed with each statement. And again, in that 5 to 7 range would be the positive agreement. So all the way over to the right, you will notice that we show the percent change from survey 1 to survey 2. Important to note here, in case it looks funky in some of the places, we do show relative percent change, also known as percent growth, as opposed to absolute percent change. So percent growth calculates the size of change in relation to the baseline measurement, that pre-course percentage. And this is really the standard practice in research and public health. So just wanted to make a note there because we often do get a lot of questions about that. But with this slide specifically, it will be helpful to identify areas where we see either only very small positive growth or maybe even no growth at all from survey 1 to survey 2 to really help determine areas of focus for your ongoing efforts and get an understanding of where your students are truly at. This is not to say that areas where students are particularly strong should be ignored. You certainly will still want to find ways to incorporate those concepts into what you do to really maintain students' positive and healthy attitudes. So they certainly, we wouldn't suggest ignoring them, but maybe putting some emphasized focus on the areas where they need some boosting. So for this particular school, it's really exciting to see that there was a 59% positive percent change for I know how to report a sexual assault at my school. So naturally, we would expect the percentage to be low in survey 1 when students are at home before coming to campus since they haven't taken the course yet. But it's great to see that the reporting information provided in the course has had such a positive impact in this area for them. And CLEARI regulations, again, do require that students need to be trained on available resources and applicable jurisdiction policies. So it's really good to have this specific data to determine the degree to which this needs to continue to be reinforced with students. And this is really all the more reason to make sure you're taking advantage of the customization options within the course and really adding your campus-specific resources and policies. And again, when it comes to reporting, I think the question we want to ask ourselves here is, it was really great to see such a positive growth here, but what are ways that we can continue to promote awareness about where and how to report at the institution so that students do not forget this information or potentially lose confidence in doing it. All right, so on this next slide, you will notice that there are actually a few areas where we see a negative percent change from survey 1 to survey 2. And this is actually not uncommon. We do see that this tends to happen in a few areas for most schools when we look at their data. Typically, we really only ever see a single-digit negative percent change when it does occur. So only when we see a double-digit negative percent change is it really a cause for concern. But I do want to share that there really are a few reasons why we may see a negative percent change in the awareness and attitudes from survey 1 to survey 2. So one reason certainly might be that the healthy majority of students are being impacted by the unhealthy attitudes and behaviors of some of their peers who might be influencing their views or opinions about these topics. And additionally, as I mentioned before, since Survey 2 is taken after being on campus for at least a few weeks, the college campus and environmental factors that students are experiencing since the end of the course in their day-to-day life may be greatly impacting their responses as well and their feelings about all of these different situations. And lastly, the other reason we might see a negative % change is that students may have overcompensated what they know about these issues and how they really feel about them. So again, similar to what Mary said earlier, the course level sets them to where they're truly at after they're kind of completely and fully educated around these concepts. And actually, educational programs have sometimes shown to move things in a negative direction for certain concepts such as this, because it brings the learner closer to where they're actually at once they get a full understanding of the topic. And, you know, in some of these, in Survey 1 responses, you know, students are coming in at the 96, 97% positive response rate. So in many cases, there's almost nowhere to go but down. So hopefully that provides some context into why we might see some of those negative numbers. With this particular school, we would really want to focus on that negative 5% change, since that was the biggest negative change we saw, which was, it's not my responsibility to prevent sexual assault at my school. So this would be an area of focus that the school wanted to pay attention to and address directly with students moving forward. So some questions the school might want to ask themselves here are, you know, why is it that students feel this way when we know they feel inclined to step in and have seen in the data they're already actively playing a role? So kind of why are we seeing that negative change there? Maybe they don't realize the impact they can have when intervening, or the idea of preventing sexual assault just seems way bigger than them. So it's really an important conversation to better understand and try to provide clarity on with students, really so they know how they can play an essential role in prevention with what to them might seem like very small actions.
This next slide is based on Survey 2 data only, which comes right before the intercession. And this speaks to the perceptions about the campus support and then the readiness to change of the students. So the data here helps you understand the phase that your students are in as it relates to that change. So their phase might be pre-contemplation, ready to be involved, et cetera. If we look at the campus climate side, so the green side of this chart, it provides us a quick overview of the perceptions around the institution's support and commitment around these topics. This is important because we need to know where we're going to be starting in order to make any changes. Because of where this is happening, if you're launching the course pre-matriculation, this is probably one of the first times that you're introducing this information to the students. You're doing it early in their career at the institution. We're seeing a very high confidence in the institution. The goal after seeing this would be to keep it that way. We want to make sure that students continue to understand that you take reports of sexual assault seriously, that you're committed to preventing sexual assault. So we want to make sure that this continues in an upward fashion. You've provided them with the course and the information. Maybe you had a session around Title IX at orientation, and they're on your campus now. So what else can you do to support the climate and share your commitment of the student safety? On the other side of this chart, we're looking at community readiness data. I think here it's important to note the lower percentages. And certainly next to these higher percentages, it stands out a little bit more. Sometimes I think we see these lower percentages because students are unaware of how they can get involved on your campus. So while you're giving them the information, they haven't necessarily been on your campus as long, so they're not really sure how to reach out and to get those resources. One of the things I would point out here is using the student engagement data in the platform. So we do ask students questions and we ask them if they would like to be contacted to become more involved on the campus, and they self-identify. You can get a list of their names and emails so that you can reach out to them. Another option in the course to customize is actually some opportunities for them to engage, and so you can put in other student engagement opportunities like becoming a residence hall assistant or maybe becoming a peer mentor. So again, they can get that information and they know how to become involved on your campus. We'll move on to the next slide here.
All right, great. So This slide is really giving you some great insight into the impact of the course and how it really resonated with your students. So again, this is data from survey 2 in the course, after part 2. This is, again, a Likert scale style question. So we're showing students that answered positively agreeing with all of these statements in the 5 to 7 range. And this data really completes the picture of what we see with the knowledge gain data. So students are self-reporting here how they feel now more prepared and really understand the content areas better now than they did before the course. So as an institution, you now have data both on what students learned as well as how they experienced it. And all of this really helps you to assess for value, effectiveness, and outcome with the training, and whether or not it's really resonating with your students. Helps to identify areas where the outcomes were very successful, or again, maybe areas where improvements can be made. So again, that kind of, equally as critical as annual training is the annual assessment for effectiveness and impact. So this data can really help glean some insights into that.
Great. And I know we are approaching the end of our time together. We just have a few more slides to go through, and we do want to open the floor for some questions. We see that there are some in the chat box, so you can start putting them in there if you'd like to. But the impact report really wraps up with some best practices recommendations. As part of your partnership with EVERFI, we also provide through the Campus Prevention Network research, white papers, and then of course the best practices. And so the next couple slides really help you to illustrate and share with other people some of those best practices. So this is the EVERFI Wellness and Prevention Framework. Again, a great way to encourage the continuous work of prevention. Prevention is certainly a process. It's not a one-time project, and you can't use the same program every year without making some changes and edits to it. So the first step is really to establish a foundation, and by using Haven pre-matriculation with your students, you're certainly doing that. If you're using other EVERFI courses, be it with your returning students or maybe with your faculty and staff, not only are you creating and establishing that foundation, but you're creating a consistent message for your community. From there, you can start using the data to better understand where the challenges are and, of course, where your successes are. And once you have that data and you analyze it, you can move into making some changes with programs or policies if need be. Finally, you can evaluate it for outcomes of those changes and then head back to the very beginning. By working through this process, you're constantly changing and making improvements to meet your community where they are with their understanding of these topics and their needs. Great. So really quick, just some considerations for your prevention strategy. So as we think big picture when it comes to a comprehensive and effective prevention strategy, we just wanted to share some considerations that should be kept in mind while planning your path forward. So we're really looking here at the 4 pillars that we feel are essential to incorporating into that campus-wide approach. It's really easy to want to focus a lot of our efforts and energy around programming, which can seem engaging and exciting to students. But as you can see here, it's really just the tip of the pyramid when it comes to what our considerations and where our focus should be if we really want to have the greatest impact. So where we should instead start is trying to move the needle and create change with institutionalization around these issues. That's really the foundation that's needed to be able to have the greatest impact in all of the other key areas. So thinking if your school does have institutional buy-in from senior leadership, if you do, or even if you don't, how can you work to build that, maybe using the data to help in those conversations. So in terms of resources outside of the program to continue to support you in your efforts, wanted to mention the Haven Partner Guide. If you haven't seen this before or you want it, feel free to reach out directly to your customer success manager. It's a comprehensive guide that outlines the Haven course content and really gives some great suggestions for how to continue that education beyond the course itself. Once the online training is over, provides recommendations for in-person programming efforts and how you can continue that conversation. We also encourage you to visit our Campus Prevention Network website. It's a wonderful resource to partners where you will have immediate access to white papers, guidebooks, webinar recordings, and any kind of pertinent information from research and data in the field. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. And wanted to give a quick reminder about our annual summit coming up this June 6th through 8th in New Orleans. It's our annual summit that we have every year, and we're really excited about it. If you want to hear more or potentially attend, again, feel free to reach out to your customer success manager.
and they can share registration information for you.
The last part of the presentation serves as a resource for aggregated national data. So we do provide you the data for the survey questions at a national level and then wrap it up with a course map. So certainly we're not going to flip through all of those. It really is just a resource for you. And we hope that you're able to take a look at that and look through some of the data. We hope that the review of the impact report has been helpful and insightful. Please feel free to utilize this report and past reports as resources to start or continue conversations about prevention best practices. If you have questions about your report or your data, you can certainly reach out to your customer success manager directly. We are more than happy to lead a data call with you and your team. And so what we'd like to do is open the floor for some questions. We know we have a couple of them here, so we're going to read through them real quick, and then we will address those. So feel free to add more in. While we're taking a look at those, Michaela, if you wouldn't mind launching the last poll, and this is really for us to understand if you'd like us to have your customer success manager reach out to you to set up a one-on-one meeting to review your institution's impact report. It doesn't have to be an hour, it can be less time, but we just want to make sure any clarification you need is provided to you and we can help you along the way. So please feel free to respond to that. We're just going to take a look at these quick questions.
All right, so while folks are responding to that, and again, we're not going to show the results of that poll, but internally we are going to look at those and notify the appropriate customer success managers so that they can be in touch with you directly about potentially scheduling a call with you all about your specific data. Just a few questions I'm seeing here from the chat feature. Someone did mention that the national numbers we were showing in this sample report didn't necessarily match the ones they were seeing in theirs. The main explanation for that would likely be the timing of your implementation. So if you launched pre-matriculation during the summertime, we're going to show you the national numbers for all of our partner institutions that also launched pre-matriculation. But if you launched post-matriculation after the start of fall semester, after students have come to campus, we're going to be showing you national numbers for our post-matriculation schools. So those national data set numbers do differ depending on the timing of your implementation. So that would likely be the reason for that. Someone else also asked, does EVERFI give those taking the course the ability to speak to someone if they feel uncomfortable or overwhelmed by the subject matter? So a couple of things there. We do yes and no. This is an optional feature that you can decide to turn on or off in the course, but we do have a live chat feature that allows students to click a button and immediately be taken into an external window where they can chat anonymously with an advocate trained professionally by the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So there is a feature for them to be able to do that sort of in real time. And we do, of course, have a lot of trigger warning language in the course, about potentially sensitive questions or content coming up, just to make students kind of aware of that ahead of time. And there's a safety exit button in the course as well that if they ever feel particularly triggered, they can click and be immediately exited from the course. So there are kind of a variety of different options for them. Great. So other than that, I think that, like I said, we have the information about who wants to schedule a call with your CSM. So we will wrap it up here at the top of the hour. Really, really do appreciate you all making time. I hope this was very helpful for the work that you do. We look forward to speaking to you all soon. Have a great rest of the day.